This is one of the most amazing videos on this channel. This will sound very strange, but on April 27th, 2023, there was a prophetic rainbow over the famous Rainbow gas tank and major landmark in Boston, on the same day that news broke that New York State would become the first state to ban gas in buildings under 7 stories high, which is pointing to the day that a dirty bomb will explode and release toxic gas in New York City. And this is part of a massive prophetic story that God is telling that includes the movie Fever Pitch, starring Drew Barrymore and Jimmy Fallon, and also the 2018 and 2004 Boston Red Sox, and the prophetic rainbows over Fenway Park in Boston, and the 1918 Boston Red Sox, and the 1918 Spanish flu, and the curse of the Bambino, and the day that the British burned down the White House and Capitol building in 1813, and the Revelation chapter 12 sign that was fulfilled in the night sky on September 23rd, 2017, and so much more is a prophecy that is predicting that there will be a catastrophic explosion on the surface of the sun that will cause massive power outages in America and on Earth on February 22nd, 2024. And it is also a prophecy that is predicting that a dirty bomb will explode in Manhattan in New York City on February 3rd, 2024. And there will be a massive evacuation of Manhattan Island. It is also likely that the official narrative in the mainstream media that will emerge regarding this event will somehow be a lie. The date that this video is posted proves that this prediction was made ahead of time, as does this timestamped email and forensic notes PDF. If you are skeptical, please email me and I will forward these to you. Although it has been known since early 2021 that a dirty bomb would explode in Manhattan in the near future. As you can see in this email, this prediction for a dirty bomb explosion in Manhattan on February 3rd was known since at least December 17th. There are also many other videos on this channel that make this prediction that were posted many days before this video was posted. Alright, here we have yet another truly profound, amazing story that incorporates God's true, big picture of signs. And it is leading to this prediction for the dirty bomb in Manhattan on May 4th. And it involves so many different things, but related to Boston and the 2018 Boston Red Sox World Series, and furthermore their World Series in 2004 when they broke the curse of the Bambino after not winning a World Series in 86 years. And so much more than just this, though. So much more than just the Boston Red Sox. Let's just get into it, and you'll see what I'm alluding to here with this being so amazing as we go through the information. First of all, this email thread was written on April 30th. This proves right here that this email was written on April 30th, before the predicted date of the dirty bomb explosion in Manhattan on May 4th. This video was produced prior to May 4th, 2023. May 4th, or the date 5-4, as we now know, hints at the 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment, the first black regiment in the Civil War, and the reason God has used this theme is because it conveys the theme of slavery and freedom, which is the overarching theme of the Bible and of this life, and the current end times spiritual battle, the battle to end all battles, that we are all involved in right now. This is why, for example, on April 13th, the S&P 500 stock index gained 54 points, and the prophetic hockey game involving the team from Massachusetts had a final score of 5-4, which hinted at the 54th Massachusetts Regiment. This is also why on April 13th, the 21-year-old document leaker was arrested in Massachusetts 21 days before the date 5/4, which hints at 54. Arguably, the most important video on this channel, at least in regards to the prediction of the dirty bomb in Manhattan, is the 54th Massachusetts Regiment video. Once the prediction comes to pass, you should know that all of the videos on this channel should be watched. However, there are a few top videos, such as the 54th Massachusetts Regiment video, the East Palestine video, the Obama Returns to the White House video, the 3 Mile Island accident video, and the Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory video. As you watch this video that you are currently watching, keep in mind that it was produced before May 4th, when it was believed that it would be the date of the predicted dirty bomb in Manhattan. However, May 4th turned out to be the penultimate date that is leading to February 3rd. In fact, the trail of signs between May 4th and February 3rd goes through the date December 2nd, and December 2nd, 12/2, hints at 212 and 212, the area code of Manhattan, and the date 12/2, which hints at 212, is 212 days after May 4th. This is why one of the prophetic signs on May 4th was the law passed by the 12th state to join the Union, restricting abortion to 12 weeks. The 12th state and 12 weeks for abortions hints at 12 to the power of 2, which hints at 212, and hints at the date 12/2, and hints at adding 212 days to May 4th to reach the date 12/2. The penultimate step in the trail of signs leading to the predicted dirty bomb in New York, the first state to table a law to legalize abortions. In other words, the bomb in New York will be judgment for abortions. To learn about the profound prophetic signs that occurred on December 2nd and how they confirm adding exactly 9 weeks to reach the date of the predicted dirty bomb or suitcase nuke in New York on February 3rd, watch the very important Okinawa Obama video. So, I wrote in this email, I just wrote it out, my thoughts regarding this prophetic sign that occurred on April 27th, which was this rainbow over the Rainbow gas tank in Boston, which is a major landmark of Boston. So we have a prophetic rainbow, and it's one of a number of prophetic rainbows that have occurred in Boston, as you will see. So I wrote, it figures that the Columbia Gas Company explosions and the Boston Red Sox 2018 World Series would be used to point to the predicted dirty bomb explosion on May 4th, which hints at the 54th Massachusetts Regiment. And if you haven't watched that video yet, I highly recommend watching that. Probably you should watch that now and come back to this video. The 54th Massachusetts Regiment prophecy video on this channel. I would recommend watching that now. This is a rainbow over a rainbow painted gas tank. This gas tank is a symbol of Boston. The rainbow design painted on a 140-foot, 43-meter tall liquid natural gas storage tank is the largest copyrighted work of art in the world. Highly visible from daily commuters' drives on Interstate 93, it is considered one of the major landmarks of Boston, akin to the Citgo sign, which coincidentally, because of this video, is seen from Fenway Park, the historic Fenway Park in which the Boston Red Sox play their games. So it right here ties into the Boston Red Sox already, because we were talking about these massive commercial advertisements, if you will. I mean, the gas tank is actually a practical thing too, but it has the name of the company on the side of it, and it's essentially promotion for the company. The rainbow swash, which is what we're talking about, I'll show a picture here of this. It's called a rainbow swash. It's, I guess, a swash of colors over the gas tank. Has a controversial history and is rooted in the current Civil War begun by baby boomers during the Vietnam War. From Wikipedia, since the 1970s, the rainbow swash has been controversial. The mural was criticized as purportedly featuring a profile of Vietnamese leader Ho Chi Minh's face in its blue stripe. Kent, the artist that painted this, the one that has the copyright on the painting, who is famous for this rainbow swash on the gas tank, Kent, that's her name, a former nun, was a peace activist, and some believe she was protesting the Vietnam War. It was painted in 1971, but Kent herself always denied embedding such a profile. In 1992, the original rainbow-painted LNG, liquid natural gas tank, was torn down, and the rainbow swash was recreated on the adjacent tank, despite objections from veterans groups. Okay, so this is clearly a symbol of the Civil War. The culture war, the two halves of the baby boomer generation that was split into two camps beginning in the 1960s and 70s. This is a pattern, if you know or are familiar with the famous book, The Fourth Turning, this breaking into two camps of the baby boomer generation is a repeating thing every 80 to 100 years. Okay, so anyway, we are at the climax of the Civil War, which has turned into a true spiritual war between good and evil. Anyway, we also have on the same day as the rainbow. This rainbow appeared over this natural gas tank on the same day that news broke that New York State would become the first state to pass a statewide law banning natural gas in new construction. This is part of their religious war, their climate hysteria, right? Because that's replaced the God of the Bible. Their politics has become their new religion. And so this is part of it, this banning of natural gas, because in this vote in the New York State legislature, it's along party lines. It's partisan. It's a culture war thing, this banning of natural gas, believe it or not. That's how crazy left politics is these days. The ban applies to buildings under 7 stories because carbon isn't a pollutant. In fact, the world is starved from carbon dioxide. Plants were just barely getting by. And since the modest increase, which isn't increasing anymore, because that's how it works, and that's another subject, but the modest increase in CO2, or rather the temperatures aren't increasing anymore, but the modest increase in CO2 has been hugely beneficial to green things around the earth, including agriculture. You know, there's been a benefit of billions of dollars in agriculture because of the CO2. I mean, when you have a greenhouse, you pump it full of carbon dioxide. This is plant food. And it's the exact opposite of the truth, as is the case with all of the leftist politics, right? Because Satan is behind those politics, and Satan, humans exhale carbon dioxide, and essentially Satan hates humans. That's the root of all of this. But I digress. So the ban applies to buildings under 7 stories. This news of the ban on gas and the rainbow over the gas tank is 7 days before it is predicted that a dirty bomb will explode in New York City on the date May 4th, which hints at the 54th Massachusetts Regiment. The flights that slammed the towers and collapsed in New York City on 9/11 were flights from Boston. The company name on the side of the rainbow gas tank is National Grid, which gives this prophetic sign national symbolism. Okay? So again, we have the sign confirming adding 7 days to the date of the rainbow over the gas tank, because this was the day that New York State news came out that it would ban gas in buildings under 7 stories. Okay? The gas tank appeared in the opening credits. This gas tank, this famous gas tank, appeared in the opening credits of the movie Fever Pitch. 2005, the movie came out. The plot of this movie includes the extremely prophetic 2004 Boston Red Sox World Series win. That's the reason why this movie was made. It was the reason why it was popular. It's because it was just after their 2004 Boston Red Sox win. The Boston Red Sox were on people's minds at the time, and also the fans of Boston Red Sox, which had waited forever for them to win a World Series. Okay? Well, my apologies. This movie was made during the 2004 season, the season that the Red Sox won their World Series finally after 86 years. But the original plot of the movie was to have the Red Sox in the movie lose at the end of the season like they always do. But this time it actually, and while they were filming the movie, history changed and the Red Sox went on to win the World Series. In fact, the final scene of the movie is, in fact, filmed in St. Louis in the final game of the World Series on October 27th, 2004. This movie is filmed in St. Louis, and as I will explain in a minute, this game in St. Louis, this final game, is extremely prophetic, the night of the blood moon, the only blood moon ever seen from a stadium during a World Series game. The blood moon was seen over the Gateway Arch of St. Louis. And in the Bible, judgment on a people symbolically begins at the gates. And anyway, that game, this movie is filmed during that game. They had to rewrite the movie because of the win of the Red Sox. And then the movie was released during the opening week of baseball in 2005, just as the Boston Red Sox were receiving the players were receiving their World Series championship rings. And so the movie was intended to be this perennial losing, cursed team, the Boston Red Sox, which is a story. And anyway, the history changed and they had to rewrite everything, and they even filmed it. And the point here is that they filmed the movie in this prophetic game, which makes this movie prophetic. I already included it in this video. I already knew it was prophetic, but I didn't realize it was this prophetic. God really, really used this movie. It's part of this prophetic sign, in other words. And I'm sure it benefited the sales of this movie too, because the Red Sox would have been on everyone's mind, and coincidentally, it was released with perfect timing because it was Red Sox Fever. Speaking of Fever Pitch, the name of the movie. America at that time had Red Sox fever. All right, here is what is written on Wikipedia regarding what I just described. The original plot had assumed the Red Sox would lose in the playoffs. However, the Red Sox stunned the baseball world when they won 4 straight games to win the 2004 American League Championship Series against the rival Yankees, becoming the first Major League Baseball team to win a 7-game series after losing the first 3 games, and subsequent World Series against the St. Louis Cardinals to break the quote-unquote curse of the Bambino. Thus, the ending had to be rewritten, the ending of the movie. On the day of Game 4, with the Red Sox on the verge of a sweep, the Farrellys, the directors, decided to bring Barrymore and Fallon, the actors, Drew Barrymore and Jimmy Fallon, and a film crew to St. Louis hours before the first pitch. And Barrymore and Fallon attended the game at Busch Stadium in character. When the Red Sox made the final out to secure the 3-0 win over the Cardinals and broke the curse, Fox cameras, meaning the broadcaster covering the game, Fox, on live broadcast, caught Barrymore and Fallon as Lindsay and Ben, the two characters in the movie, running onto the field and kissing to celebrate. The film, with its updated ending, was also screened at Fenway Park the following August on a screen in center field, which Barrymore and Fallon attended. So, but anyway, yeah, so this was actually their kissing, and the final scene of the movie is actually a real thing caught live on the Fox broadcast for this prophetic final game when the Boston Red Sox won. It was part of the real life broadcast. So this movie, Fever Pitch, begins with this gas tank, this landmark of Boston. The plot of the movie is about a 7-year-old boy that moves to Boston with his divorced mother and attends a Boston Red Sox baseball game and then becomes a lifetime fan of the Boston Red Sox. Extreme fan. This rainbow over the gas tank is 7 days before the predicted dirty bomb explosion. Okay, so this is another confirmation of the 7 days because of the plot of this movie, which begins with the gas tank. The plot of the movie begins with the 7-year-old boy who visits the Boston Red Sox or attends a Boston Red Sox game. 23 years later, this same boy meets his wife. And so that's the story. It's a romance comedy. So it's 23 years later and he meets his wife, and 23 is prophetic because it reveals the identity of the Antichrist who wore jersey number 23. And this is sports symbolism, this Red Sox. And so the Antichrist, the basketball president, is known for wearing is known for wearing jersey number 20. He's also known for playing basketball, being the basketball president. He had a basketball court installed at the White House. Today there's a basketball court at the White House because of this president. The soundtrack of the movie Fever Pitch is 54 minutes long. And that, of course, hints at the 54th Massachusetts Regiment. If it is relevant, the soundtrack was released 1 day shy of exactly 6 + 6 + 6 years before the rainbow over the rainbow gas tank. The first scene of the movie Fever Pitch is of the gas tank. So the first scene again is this movie Fever Pitch, and then it's which 6 + 6 + 6 years exactly, which hints at the number of the Antichrist, 666. The first song of the soundtrack is called Dirty Water, which hints at the dirty bomb and toxic water. Furthermore, the rainbow gas tank is right next to the ocean. It's next to water. The news of the New York State ban on gas in buildings under 7 stories on the day of the rainbow over the rainbow gas tank in Massachusetts was exactly 54 months after the extremely prophetic Boston Red Sox game on October 27th, 2018. This news was on April 27th, 2023, exactly 54 months after this extremely prophetic Boston Red Sox World Series game on October 27th, 2018. 54 months hints at the 54th Massachusetts Regiment. And we were talking about the Boston Red Sox, who are from Massachusetts. Prior to October 27th, 2018, I had predicted that there would be a prophetic sign involving the number 4 in this World Series baseball game on that day. It was game number 4, and the story of the game in which Trumpet, I call him Trumpet because Trump is God's trumpet that he uses to trumpet and highlight his prophetic signs. And for example, this is a prime example. Trump tweeted regarding this baseball game and tweeted about the story of the game, which was the blown 4-0 lead. And Trump mentioned the 4-0 lead in his tweet of the Los Angeles Dodgers after pulling too early from the game their pitcher, player number 44. That's a bunch of 4s, and I had predicted ahead of time that there would be a bunch of prophetic 4s in that game. And it was game 4, furthermore. So it was game 4, 4-0 lead blown was the story of the game, and it was because, and the story of the game was that the pitcher 44 was pulled too early. Pitchers on the pitching mound symbolize the Antichrist on the Temple Mount. The pitcher, number 44, hints at the 44th president Antichrist. And his name is Rich Hill. This prophetic game 4 was the same day that 4 police officers were wounded in the quote-unquote rich Squirrel Hill neighborhood of Pittsburgh in the synagogue shooting. The media kept repeating how this shooting was unusual in a way because it was in the prosperous, rich, affluent neighborhood of Squirrel Hill. And this was the same day as the prophetic sign involving the pitcher named Rich Hill, which was obviously a confirmation from God for the prophetic significance of both of these signs. This game 4 was about the 4-0 blown lead, and it was exactly 40 weeks, which is what 4-0 hints at. It hints at 40. This blown 4-0 lead was exactly 40 weeks, which is symbolic of birth pains, because when the disciples asked Jesus for the signs to look for of his return, Jesus replied with the metaphor of birth pains. And according to the medical profession, the average human gestation period is 40 weeks. And so that's why God uses 40 weeks in his end time signs. It's symbolism for the end times period. And so again, the 4-0 lead that was blown, which hints at 40, was exactly 40 weeks, which is symbolic of birth pains, after the launch of the Humanity Star, which was an Antichrist Star of Bethlehem sign, and which is a reference to a birth, the Star of Bethlehem. And there's more to be said about this. I don't want to go off onto the rabbit trail, just explaining every single sign in complete detail. It would take 5 hours to make this video, but it would really be impossible because God's signs is an interconnected web, and when you try to explain one part of the web, you end up pulling the entire web, and that would be the case if I were to explain every detail of this prophetic sign, for example. But I'll just say that, for one thing, the satellite was supposed to be in orbit for 9 months, coincidentally, because the people that launched it didn't know that they were launching an Antichrist Star of Bethlehem, and therefore 9 months would symbolize a birth. Of course, the Star of Bethlehem is associated with the birth of Jesus, which is why it occurred 40 weeks exactly before the 4-0 blown lead. But the Antichrist, it was named the Humanity Star by the company that launched it, and it was a promotion for their company, and it was supposed to glitter in the night sky, and it was controversial. There was a lot of mocking it and criticizing it as space junk, and completely backfired on the company. It was negative publicity. And anyway, it was supposed to have this humanitarian message, and humanism message. And humanism is Antichrist. It's false religion. It's the worship of humans, worship of man at the center. So that's what the message behind the Humanity Star was, that was promoted by the company, which made it Antichrist and therefore the Antichrist Star of Bethlehem. Okay, this game 4 was also exactly 444 days after the Revelation chapter 12 sign that depicted a birth in the night sky. The Revelation 12 sign regarded the rapture of God's faithful from the Antichrist. So the Revelation chapter 12, great sign in heaven, as it said in Revelation chapter 12, is about a birth, the birth of the man-child that is symbolic of the church that will be raptured. That's the only way to read that passage, by the way, and it is the correct way. The woman is symbolically corporate, is corporate symbolism for the Jews that will be left behind, persecuted in Judea. And the dragon is symbolic corporate for the Antichrist system and the Antichrist. And therefore also the child. It's not baby Jesus. Furthermore, the word used is snatched, violently removed from. That's the Greek word. It's not a ascended gently into heaven at Jesus' ascension. It's violently snatched from. It's an escape from the Antichrist, the dragon that's waiting at the feet of the woman to devour the child, which is why it all is symbolism for the rapture, the escape of God's faithful before the Great Tribulation period, the final 5 months, which will be in May of 2024. All right, so we can clearly see here that God used this extremely prophetic 2018 World Series, and there's more to be explained, much more. But the central sign of it was Game 4. It involved the pitcher number 44 and the 4-0 blown lead. And as I just explained, that hints at subtracting 40 weeks and also 444 days. 4-0 blown lead, 40 weeks. Number 44, 444 days. 40 weeks back and 444 days back gets us these two signs, prophetic signs in the night sky that depict a birth, that symbolize a birth. And so they're connected that way too. And the rapture sign is about the escape of God's faithful from the Antichrist. The Antichrist Star of Bethlehem is also about the beginning period of the Antichrist. And so God used these two signs to point to Game 4 and pitcher number 44 on the pitching mound, because pitchers on the pitching mound symbolize the Antichrist on the Temple Mount, described in Bible prophecy, in order to reveal the identity of the Antichrist. President 44, the 44th president. It's crystal clear. And then, in addition to this, exactly 54 months after this Game 4 and these signs that I'm talking about that point to the 44th president, 54 months later gets us the rainbow over the rainbow gas tank in Boston, and the other sign, the 7 stories gas ban in New York. And as I will explain, Boston and New York are connected because of their because of the 2004 year with the Boston Red Sox and them winning 4 games straight against the New York Yankees, their arch rival, and the curse of the Bambino, which involves trading Babe Ruth from Boston to New York. And the 2 planes that struck the 2 towers were in New York were flights from Boston, and they were flights to Los Angeles, which is why in this 2018 World Series, Boston was playing Los Angeles, and why on Game 1 of the 2018 World Series, at the time of the beginning of the Game 1, at the time of the rainbow over Fenway Park in Boston, as I will explain in a minute, the historic World War II plane crashed onto Highway 101 in Los Angeles. And the Game 1 in Boston and the prophetic plane crash in Los Angeles on Highway 101 hint at Flight 11, because 101 hints at 11. That was a flight from Boston to Los Angeles that hit the first tower on 9/11 and had a crew of 11 people, and the Twin Towers looked like a giant 11 in New York State, the 11th state to join the Union, and New York City, which is made of 11 letters, because Jesus coined the phrase the 11th hour, which in ancient Israel referred to the last hour of daylight before darkness, and in English is an idiom that means last chance, time is running out, as in last chance for the nation to repent and turn back to God before judgment destruction, which is what the 9/11 events were, a warning for last chance to repent. And what this crash on Highway 101 was at the time of the rainbow over Fenway Park at the beginning of Game 1 of the 2018 World Series was a reminder of the 9/11 judgment warning. But The point is that we add 54 months to get to April 27th, 2023. And as I explained, we add 7 days from that to get us to the date 5-4, which hints at 54, and the 54th Massachusetts Regiment. And 5-4 hints at 54, which is a multiple of 9. And 5 plus 4 equals 9. And the number 9 is the most important number in God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, because from the Bible, it symbolizes God's judgment. And the 9th prime number is 23, and that's why the basketball president that wore jersey number 23 became president in 2009 and will become president again in 2023. And so God pairs 9 and 23 together to confirm the signs and connections and to reveal the identity of the Antichrist. And this predicted dirty bomb on the date May 4th, which hints at 5-4 and 54 and the number 9, is in 2023. In other words, it's 5-4, 2023, and 5-4 hints at 9. And so therefore, this date, 5-4, 2023, is a pairing of 9 and 23 that reveal the identity of the Antichrist. And it connects with 7 days and then 54 months exactly to the date that player number 44 was on the pitching mound in this prophetic sign that revealed the identity of the Antichrist. And so in other words, Barack Obama is the Antichrist, but also this prediction for the dirty bomb in Manhattan will somehow be a part of this process that will bring the Antichrist to power again and make him president again before the end of 2023. It is predicted it will be November 19th, actually. He will be the 48th president after Michelle Obama will be the 47th president. From the Bible, 14 years, a period of 14 years is symbolism for the end times period, because Joseph interpreted the dream of pharaohs, and the king of Egypt is Antichrist symbolism. Pharaoh in Egypt that persecuted the Hebrews is a type or a foreshadow for the Antichrist. Joseph interpreted Pharaoh's dream in the book of Genesis, and the dream involves 14 cows, 2 sets of 7 cows, which were symbolism for 2 sets of 7 years, as Joseph explained. The interpretation, the understanding was given to Joseph by God to interpret the Pharaoh's dream. And the first 7 cows are the cows of prosperity. They're the healthy cows, and they are followed by 7 sickly cows, and they represent the 7 years of famine, which is symbolism, a foreshadow, a prophetic type for the symbolic 7 years of the end times period that is described in Daniel chapter 9. And so this is why in God's signs, 14 years is relevant for this reason. It's, again, symbolism for the end times. There is another amazing example of this 14 years, which I won't get into because that would be going off onto another rabbit trail. It's another long explanation. But there is the famous story about how the Maasai tribe in Kenya donated 14 cows to America after 9/11. This was an international news story. After 9/11, the Maasai tribe was informed about what had happened, and they were horrified, and they wanted to donate 14 of their cows to America, and so they did. And also, this was to reveal the identity of the Antichrist, who was born in Kenya, Barack Obama. From this prophetic Game 4 in this extremely prophetic 2018 World Series, this Game 4 that was all about player number 44 and the 4-0 blown lead, it is exactly 14 years back to Game 4 of the 2004 World Series, when the Boston Red Sox beat the St. Louis Cardinals 4-0 to win the World Series and break the curse of the Bambino. And so this 14 years connection is confirmed because it is exactly 14 years between these two Boston Red Sox Game 4s, and they each involve a 4-0. It was the 4-0 blown lead, which God designed to hint at and be a reminder of how the Red Sox beat the Cardinals 4-0 to win the 2004 World Series. And not only that, to get to the World Series, they beat their arch rival, the New York Yankees, by winning 4 games in a row. They were down 3-0, and they became the first team ever to win 4 games in a row to win a 7 games best out of 7 American League Championship Series. And so they won 4 games in a row to beat the Yankees, and that's also relevant because the big thing about the curse of the Bambino is the trade of Babe Ruth from Boston to New York, from the Red Sox to the Yankees, which hints at the flights from Boston that slammed into the towers in New York on 9/11, which is again also the reason for this connection between the rainbow over the rainbow gas tank in Boston 7 days before the predicted dirty bomb in New York. And so to get to the World Series and then finally win it, they went through New York and won a prophetic 4 games in a row, and then won another 4 games in a row to win the World Series against the St. Louis Cardinals. And that, of course, and this was in 2004, and this, of course, hints at 4-4 and the 44th president. And the curse of the Bambino hints at the curse of the Antichrist. The night that they won the World Series was the only ever blood moon lunar eclipse seen from a baseball stadium during a World Series game. This is the only time in history. It was just 6 days, which is 144 hours, from the night that the 44th president won his election for U.S. Senator from Illinois. When he first became a senator, when he won the election, and then arrived in Washington, D.C., the Antichrist, that was just 6 days after, which is the equivalent of 144 hours. And 144 is the number in the book of Revelation that is symbolic of those that will be raptured from the Antichrist, from the persecution from the Antichrist. Okay? The first World Series, and so that's what the purpose of that blood moon was. On the day that they broke the curse of the Bambino. Wow. But there's more, as I'll explain. The first World Series win for the Red Sox in 86 years hints at 8 times 6 equals 48, and the future 48th president and Antichrist, Barack Obama, because Michelle Obama will be the 47th president. But Barack Obama will become the 48th president before this year, 2023, ends. In fact, I believe it will be on November 19th. And Michelle Obama will become the president in September of 2023. And this will be after she replaces Kamala Harris, after she will die in a plane crash, as predicted to be on June 30th in St. Louis, the location of this blood moon lunar eclipse. Now, if you know a little bit about sports history, the most infamous World Series tragedy in all of baseball history was the 1986 World Series involving the Boston Red Sox, when they were on the cusp of winning it and breaking the curse of the Bambino, but blew it with 1 out to go. They were 1 out away. I think it was even 1 strike away from winning the World Series. And then Mookie Wilson for the New York Mets, New York again, hit a slow roller down the first baseline to first baseman Bill Buckner, and the ball passed right through his legs, past his glove, and into the shallow outfield, allowing the run to score and allowing the Mets to win that game and then go on to win the World Series. This was a major part of the story of the curse of the Bambino. and this sports curse on Boston. And a part of this story is quite interesting because this player, Bill Buckner, was a superstitious man. And underneath his glove, his first baseman glove, he was wearing a batter's glove, his old, beat up, worn in batter's glove that he wore when he played for the Chicago Cubs, the other cursed sports team that's known for having the long sports curse. It's also Chicago, which reveals Barack Obama. But so it was amazing that, the ball passed through his legs, and it was the easiest play ever to make. But so that was a curse, and the glove also is kind of it's not just kind of interesting because this is all real, right? These are all prophetic signs. It's not a coincidence. And anyway, what was intended there too is that Bill Buckner wears, or at that time wore, jersey number 6, and Mookie Wilson wears number 1. And we see the classic view of this play. It's the most famous play in World Series baseball history, is the back of Mookie Wilson and his number 1 headed towards Bill Buckner, number 6, and then the ball passing through his legs. But that 1 and a 6 hints at 16. And 4 times 4, the 44th president. The curse of the Bambino, the curse of the Antichrist. But the point here, and why I went into it, is that was in 1986. And coincidentally, the next time that the Red Sox were in a World Series was in 2004, when they won it and broke the curse of the Bambino, and that was 86 years after their last World Series win in 1918. And so in other words, this most famous play of all of World Series history in 1986 was hinting at the 86 years. It was a confirmation of it. And again, it was for the purpose of revealing 16 and 4 times 4, the 44th president Antichrist curse. Further prophetic significance of this Chicago Cubs batting glove, the other cursed sports team that this Bill Buckner player was wearing, is that the last time that the Red Sox won the World Series was against the Chicago Cubs in 1918. And I'll explain more about that World Series in just a second. But that's also part of a bigger story, symbolic prophetic sign that God is telling through baseball history. And by the way, baseball history is because baseball is the America's sport, and it dates back to near the beginning of the country. It is part of American history, baseball. That's why God uses a lot of baseball prophetic signs. And here we have this overarching theme going back to the early 20th century I'm about to explain, is these 3 teams that had these long sports curses, baseball sports curses. The Chicago Cubs, the Chicago Black Sox, the Chicago White Sox from the 1919 Black Sox scandal. And they didn't win the World Series until 2005, the year after the Red Sox won. And that's okay. And we have the Red Sox. So we have the Red Sox, the White Sox, and the Cubs. And the Cubs are nicknamed the Blue Bears. So the Red Sox, White Sox, and Blue Bears hints at red, white, and blue. This is a prophetic sign on America, and it is an Antichrist curse sign. And that's why these 2 teams involved in the 3 are both from Chicago, the Chicago White Sox and Chicago Cubs, being the white and blue in the red, white, and blue, which symbolizes America. And that's absolutely astounding. And all 3 of these teams broke their sports curses while Barack Obama was in Washington, D.C. And not only that, they're all tied to Barack Obama intimately. The signs are prophetically connected to Barack Obama. And I'm explaining the first one because he was elected 6 days later, as I'm in the process of explaining. Barack Obama as a senator, threw out the first pitch of the prophetic American League Championship Series, Game 2. And so anyway, and that's exactly 19 years before the second coming. It was on October 12th, 2005, exactly 19 years before the second coming of Lord Jesus Christ, when he will defeat the Antichrist, Barack Obama, on October 12th, 2024. And the reason why the 19 years is because of the Chicago Black Sox scandal in 1919. Long story short. I explained that sign in other videos, though. Breaking the supposed curse of the Bambino hinted at the curse of the Antichrist on the nation. The blood moon lunar eclipse was seen above the Gateway Arch in St. Louis. And in the Bible, God's judgment on a people symbolically begins at the gates. And that is the big thing here. This blood moon occurred and was seen from the stadium over the Gateway Arch, and it was symbolic of the Antichrist and judgment on the nation, destruction of the nation. 144 hours between the eclipse, the curse of the Bambino, and Obama's victory hints at 9 times 4 times 4, because 144 equals 9 times 4 times 4, which hints at judgment from the Antichrist, the 44th president, because from the Bible, the number 9 is the most important number in God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel. As from the Bible, the number 9 symbolizes God's judgment, and 4 times 4 hints at the 44th president. And so that's why 144 hints at 9 times 4 times 4. And those will be rescued from the Antichrist and the judgment from the Antichrist. 86 years earlier, the Boston Red Sox beat the Chicago Cubs in the 1918 World Series on the date 9/11 in 1918. This was exactly 1,260 months after the British landed at Washington's Mount Vernon estate before proceeding to burn down the White House and the Capitol building, before being chased out of Washington, D.C. by a hurricane on the same day. Now, the reason why 1,260 is extremely amazing is because 7 times in Bible prophecy, a period of 1,260 days is symbolic of the period of the Antichrist's rule in the end times. And so it's exactly 1,260 months, a period of time as well. It's not days, but months. And it was exactly after this prophetic World Series, the final game and the win for the Red Sox, which, by the way, they won 4-2. I should have wrote that, actually. They won 4-2, which hints at 42. And 1,260 days is the equivalent of 42 months, made up of 30-day months, which is what a Bible prophetic year, a month is. A prophetic year is 12 months of 30 days each. And so 3.5 years, 1,260 days is 42 months. And that's why the Red Sox beat the Cubs 4 games to 2, exactly 1,260 months after this extremely prophetic day of 9/11 in 1813, when the British landed at Washington's Mount Vernon estate before they burned down the White House and the Capitol building. And then they were chased out of Washington, D.C. on the very same day by a hurricane. But that day, 9/11 in 1813, was exactly 188 years before the only other time a foreign enemy attacked the nation's capital, on 9/11 in 2001. The only 2 times that a foreign enemy attacked the nation's capital were on 9/11, 188 years apart. And the reason for this is because on 9/11 in 2001, the second plane, which had a crew of 9 people, the first plane had a crew of 11 people, hit the second tower 17 minutes after the first plane hit the first tower. 17 divided by 9, in other words, these are 9/11 numbers, 17 divided by 9 equals 1.888 into infinity, which is what 188 hints at. Also, H188, the 188th word in Strong's Hebrew Old Testament Concordance, is the word for woe! Used in context of extreme judgment from God, which is exactly what the 9/11 judgment warning was, exactly 188 years after the only other time a foreign enemy attacked the nation's capital. And God pointed through the 9/11 events to George Washington, and the burning of the White House is known for how the president's wife rescued the portrait of George Washington. That's another prophetic sign and story in itself, but I'll just continue on here. The second plane and second tower was the second witness, which is what the Bible says is required to confirm a matter, that it was terrorism and not an accident after the first plane. And therefore, judgment from God that pointed to Isaiah chapter 9, verse 11, which is explained in other videos. The Boston Red Sox, Chicago Cubs World Series in 1918 was also the year of the peak of Spanish flu. These signs connect to the Boston Red Sox themed movie named Fever Pitch, which hints at a virus and the Spanish flu. Like the 1919 World Series, with the Chicago Black Sox scandal, which was when the Chicago players threw the World Series for money, the Chicago Cubs in 1918 also cheated and threw the World Series for money, which isn't as widely known, but it is a fact. It's true. Both of these World Series were thrown. It was revealed publicly about the 1919 one, which is now famously called the 1919 Black Sox scandal, which, by the way, brought in the first commissioner of baseball, which God has used in his big signs big time as symbolism for the Antichrist, because this commissioner of baseball was given in a time of crisis and emergency unchecked power over every single person in baseball. Just like the Antichrist in a time of emergency and crisis will be given unchecked power over everyone in the nation. So so that's the point. And that's why Barack Obama is a Chicago Black Sox fan. That's why. That's why he's from Chicago too. It's a big part of why. It's to point to the Chicago Black Sox scandal in order to reveal that Obama is the Antichrist through the symbolism of the first commissioner of baseball and the crisis of the 1919 Black Sox scandal. So these signs connect to Boston Red Sox themed movie Fever Pitch. Okay, so I was saying, like the 1919 World Series Chicago Black Sox scandal, which was about the Chicago players which threw the World Series for money, the Chicago Cubs in 1918 also cheated and threw the World Series for money. The Antichrist Barack Obama is from Chicago. He is known to be a huge Chicago White Sox fan, and he is a corrupt, lying cheater. So the two teams in history that threw the World Series for money were both from Chicago, which is, of course, for the purpose of identifying the Antichrist, who is from Chicago. It is a lie that Spanish flu was an influenza virus. It's not. It's a lie that it is that. Okay? The NIH paper authored by the guy whose name is Fauci, which, by the way, in Italian is the word for sickle, as in the Revelation, as in the angel in Revelation chapter 14, using the sickle to reap the harvest of grapes that will be thrown into the winepress of God's wrath. That sickle guy, anyway, he authored this paper regarding the supposed isolated virus from the frozen corpse in Scandinavia, and it is a lie. This paper is a lie. It's part of the propaganda from that captured agency of the you-know-what industry in order to promote these things for influenza, right? But the truth about Spanish flu is that it was a bacterial pneumonia. That's what it really was. And the purpose of this prediction that is from God being made in this video is to prove this. The reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove these controversial things. And that is the purpose of the video and the prediction. Make no mistake. Do not appreciate that as to miss entirely the point of this prediction that is from God and the point of this video and video channel. COVID and the thing, you know what I'm talking about, is also synonymous with lies and corruption for money. Spanish flu began after experimental were administered to troops at Fort Riley in Kansas in March of 1918. These experimental things were given by the Rockefeller Institution for Medical Research, and they were responsible for killing 50 to 100 million people. That is the truth. This is a parallel with what is happening today. And this parallel was designed by God in order to reveal the truth about the thing, which is the mark of the Antichrist. And this is the purpose for the prediction being made in this video, and why God has given me a voice through this prediction. The thing is the mark of the Antichrist. It is the mark of the Antichrist. End of debate. No more discussion, no more controversy. It's over. The case closed. And it is the mark of the Antichrist in its current form. It doesn't require an additional technology to go with it, to enforce it. And it's the Antichrist in its current form. And it doesn't require some type of religious worship, such as a worship of a statue, to make it the mark of the Antichrist. It is the mark of the Antichrist as it is, and many Christians have already taken the mark of the Antichrist. But I believe that you can repent. And there's nowhere in the Bible that says that you can't. 4 days before this Game 4, in which player 44 was pulled too early from the game, thus blowing the 4-0 lead, was Game 1 of the World Series on October 23rd, 2018. This game is famous for its stunning double rainbow over Fenway Park just prior to the game. The media dubbed it the World Series Rainbow. The following day, this was repeated again with a second stunning double rainbow over Fenway Park in Boston just prior to the start of Game 2, the double rainbow before Game 2. It was a second witness, which is what the Bible says is required to confirm matters. In Game 2, the power in the Red Sox radio broadcast booth went out for 7 minutes during the key pivotal 7 minutes of the game, in which the Red Sox staged their come-from-behind rally. It was the worst possible time for the power to have gone out in the broadcast booth, because it was the exact same 7 minutes of the pivotal rally in which they came from behind and then went on to win the game. It was the most important part of the game. This power outage in the broadcast booth hinted at the power outage in the broadcast booth during Game 3 of the 1989 World Series during the San Francisco Bay Area earthquake. There are many parallels between these two World Series, because the 2018 World Series was the 29th anniversary of the 1989 World Series earthquake. This is because, and by the way, the earthquake occurred right at the beginning of the broadcast of Game 3. It's synonymous with the broadcast. And that's why the power went out in the broadcast booth in this Game 2 in 2018. Okay? And the reason, again, as I'm saying, is because it was the 29th anniversary. 2018 was the 29th anniversary of the 1989 World Series earthquake. And this is because, why this is relevant is because, according to the Gospel of Luke, Jesus began his ministry of fishing for men in 29 AD. In the Gospel of Luke, it says that Jesus began his ministry in the 15th year of the Emperor Tiberius, and Tiberius began his reign as emperor in 14 AD. So 14 plus 15 gives us 29 AD. Okay? He began his ministry of fishing for men with him and his 12 disciples for a total of 13 men. And in his last miracle, 153 fish were caught in the net, which was symbolism for the harvest of souls at the end of the age of fishing for men. 1989 is 13 times 153. Again, Jesus began with 13 men, and the end of the age is symbolized by 153 because of the fish caught in the net. That symbolizes the end of the age of fishing for men. And so the duration of the age of fishing for men is symbolized by 1989. 29 AD plus 1989 years is 2018, which was the reason for the prophetic significance of the 2018 World Series that signaled the end of the age of fishing for men and the second coming of Lord Jesus Christ 29 years after the 1989 World Series earthquake. This was an extremely prophetic earthquake, in other words, that signaled the end of the age of fishing for men, because it was in 1989. And 29 years later was another prophetic sign signaling the end of the age of fishing for men, because 29 AD plus 1989 years is 2018. In the account of Noah's flood, God gave Noah a 7 days warning to load the ark before the flood judgment. After the flood judgment, God gave Noah the sign of the rainbow that regarded God's judgment of man. Game 2 began with a prophetic rainbow before the game, and then there was a 7 minutes power outage in the Boston Red Sox radio broadcast booth during the pivotal rally for the Boston Red Sox. This was 7 days before the Boston Red Sox victory parade of duck boats that went into the Charles River. Duck boats are symbolism for Noah's Ark. The parade of duck boats in the Charles River was symbolic of John Winthrop's flotilla of ships and their arrival into the Charles River in 1630. The Pilgrims and the Boston colony is symbolism for the spiritual founding of America, which is founded on God. There are only two nations in history that were founded on our relationship with God, Israel and America. And so that's astounding if you caught that, because in the account of Noah's flood, it's a 7 days warning, and the rainbow is a sign of the flood. And from the rainbow that preceded game 2 and the 7 minutes broadcast outage, it's 7 days to the duck boats, which are symbolism for arks, Noah's arks. And they went into the Charles River, which gave it even more symbolism. On the same day that the prophetic rainbow over Fenway Park that preceded Game 1 of the 2018 World Series was the strongest ever storm to touch U.S. soil, with Typhoon U2 pummeling the U.S. Pacific Islands, which is more Noah's flood symbolism. That's why it was on the same day as the rainbow, the first one before Game 1. These U.S. Pacific Islands were won in World War II. They were captured in World War II using the World War II planes, like the one that crashed on the Highway 101 on the same day as Typhoon U2 and the rainbow over Fenway Park at the same time as the rainbow over Fenway Park. The 7 days warning in the account of Noah's flood was followed by 40 days of increasing floodwaters. The World Series rainbow and Typhoon U2 and Game 1 in Boston were exactly 40 days after the Columbia Gas Company explosions that destroyed 40 homes in a neighborhood of Boston. That's astounding. You caught that, right? 40 days. Noah's flood is 40 days. Rainbow game 1, 40 days back is the explosions in Boston. The rainbow was in Boston. 40 homes in the neighborhood were destroyed. Okay, one person was killed. A 16 years old who was celebrating his new driver's license with his friends. This story involving his driver's license emphasizes his age. The U.S. Congress later passed a law regarding gas pipeline regulation and named the bill after the teenager's name. 16 years old hints at 4 times 4 and the 44th president. Him and his friends were sitting in their minivan in their driveway when a chimney collapsed onto their vehicle. This was exactly 110 days after the very prophetic sign in Chimney Rock State Park in North Carolina on the extremely prophetic Pentecost that was at the end of a trail of signs that paralleled the timing of events in the book of Joshua when the walls of security collapsed on Jericho. Joshua died at the age of 110, hence the 110 days connection between the Chimney Rock collapse, it was a collapse actually, I'll get to that, and the chimney that collapsed on the 16-year-old teenager. Now, again, as I said, Pentecost in 2018 was at the end of an extremely prophetic trail of signs that were paralleling the timing of events in the book of Joshua that climaxed with the symbolic collapsing of the walls of security on Pentecost, and this sign was in fact a wall collapse. The wall, the retaining wall in the upper parking lot of Chimney Rock State Park collapsed, closing the park. This is at the path of totality of the Great American Eclipse. And the upper parking lot, because on Pentecost, the disciples were waiting in the upper room. They were waiting for Christ's Holy Spirit, and in the Bible, rock is symbolic of Christ. Hence this Chimney Rock State Park prophetic sign. And so this was astounding, one of many amazing signs on this Pentecost. And one of the most amazing videos ever is the book of Joshua reveals, I forget what I titled it. The book of Joshua is the key to understanding the book of Revelation. And it is. And that's why God, for one thing, demonstrated this parallel of signs to the book of Joshua. So make sure you find that video and watch that video. Okay? There will be a prediction with it. I think what will go with that is the prediction that President Trump will die on August 18th, 2023. But make sure you watch that video because Trump is trumpets, hinting at trumpets that the Hebrews blew before the walls of security of Jericho collapsed. But it's all part of the big picture. I could easily just have made the same video predicting the dirty bomb because I'm explaining the trail of signs from that Pentecost to the dirty bomb right as we speak, right? That's how God's big picture of signs works. I could make any of these signs really connect to any of the other predictions as well. But the thing here is that Joshua in the Bible died at the age of 110. And that's why we have this 110 days connection from this Pentecost, because as I just explained, this Pentecost in 2018 was at the end of a trail of signs that was paralleling the timing of events in the book of Joshua, with the climax on Pentecost, when the walls of security collapsed. Hence the collapse of this wall on Pentecost, 110 days in Chimney Rock State Park, 110 days before the collapse of the chimney in the Columbia Gas Company explosions in Boston. The name Columbia is symbolism for America, which is why God uses it in his signs, the name Columbia. The prophetic death of the 16-year-old in the collapse of the chimney in the Columbia Gas Company explosions is 40 days before the rainbow over Fenway Park at the beginning of the extremely prophetic 2018 World Series, which was 4 days before Game 4, in which pitcher player 44 was pulled too early from the game, thus blowing the 4-0 lead, on the same day that 4 police officers were wounded in the synagogue shooting. Also, this chimney that collapsed on the 16-year-old as he was celebrating getting his driver's license, which emphasized his age of 16, because he got his driver's license as soon as he turned 16. And 16 hints at 4 times 4. This chimney that collapsed on the 16-year-old that hints at 4 times 4 is 44 days before Game 4, in which player 44 was pulled too early from the game, thus blowing the 4-0 lead. And it was the Columbia Company gas explosions that killed this 16-year-old, which hints at 4 times 4, 44 days before player number 44 was pulled too early from the game, and which blew the 4-0 lead in Game 4. This was in turn exactly 54 months before the prophetic rainbow over the gas tank and major landmark of Boston, the rainbow gas tank. Okay, so that Game 4 was exactly 54 months before the prophetic rainbow over the rainbow gas tank, which is a major landmark of Boston. It's Boston, Boston, Boston. The Boston gas explosions to the Boston World Series to the Boston Rainbow over the rainbow gas tank. And it's rainbow to rainbow for that matter, because of the rainbow before Game 1 of the World Series. On the gas tank is painted a controversial rainbow. The rainbow over the rainbow gas tank is 7 days before it is predicted that America's walls of security will symbolically collapse with the explosion of a dirty bomb in New York City on May 4th, the date 5-4, which hints at the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, which is the reason for the 54 months that connects all of these prophetic signs involving Massachusetts. It's astounding. So, again, it's very simple. From the prophetic Boston, Massachusetts World Series and the rainbow over Fenway Park in Massachusetts, which was 40 days after the gas explosions in Massachusetts, we have 4 days and then 54 months, 4 days to the Game 4 of the same World Series, and then 54 months to the rainbow over the rainbow gas tank. And 7 days is synonymous with the 7 days warning in the account of Noah's flood, as is the rainbow. And 7 days after that is the prophetic, after the gas tank sign is the predicted explosion in New York City. And the other way of saying this, instead of the 40 days from the Columbia gas station to the rainbow, and then another 4 days to player number 44, the Columbia gas explosions killed the 16-year-old, which hints at 4 times 4, and that is 44 days before Game 4, and player number 44, and the 4-0 blown lead, which is in turn exactly 54 months, as in Massachusetts' 54th Regiment, to the rainbow over the rainbow gas tank, which also has a prophetic name, National Grid. Just like Columbia gas, they both symbolize the nation, which is in turn a prophetic 7 days because of the 7 days warning that God gave Noah in the account of Noah's flood that describes the rainbow, to the date 5-4, which hints at 54, and the 54th Massachusetts Regiment. The other important thing that is important beyond description, but I will try, is that all of this is pointing to the 400 years from the Pilgrim's Landing in Massachusetts. This is the big theme. The spiritual founding of America is what is God pointing to here. And that is the reason for example, the 4-0 blown lead. It was, again, as I mentioned, as I explained, for pointing exactly 40 weeks earlier to the Antichrist Star of Bethlehem. But even more important than that is that it hints at the number 400, which God is using in association with his Massachusetts signs. Because it was 400 years ago that the Pilgrims crossed the Atlantic, which they saw as a parallel with the Hebrews' exodus from religious persecution from the Pharaoh, king of Egypt, which is Antichrist symbolism, and the crossing of the Jordan River. The Pilgrims saw their crossing of the Atlantic as a parallel with the Hebrews' crossing of the Jordan River into the Promised Land. The Pilgrims were on their way to their New Jerusalem, and they wrote as such. They wrote this. They clearly believed this. And that's why this 400 years is so important. Well, the reason is because in the Bible, the Hebrews were afflicted for 400 years before their exodus from Egypt. And the Pilgrims were also escaping religious and political persecution. So 400 years, the Hebrews were escaping Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, which is a type or a foreshadow of the Antichrist. And 400 years later, after the Pilgrims' crossing, will be the arrival of the Antichrist, who will bring about religious and political persecution of Christians in America. America was the land of the free until now, because America is being judged. And it isn't only that America is being judged, it is the American church that is being judged. As Peter said, judgment begins with the church. And God is very, very, very displeased with the American church, including in terms of God's signs, especially the American evangelical church of Laodicea that thinks it is in need of nothing, as Jesus wrote. And this is why, for example, this trail of signs begins, or it goes through Pentecost. Pentecost is the feast that symbolizes the church. And I'll just quickly go through that again. From the extremely profound, and I didn't even scratch the surface of explaining it, but from the extremely profound Pentecost in 2018, and one of the number of signs, the collapse of the chimney rock, it is 100 days to the collapse of the chimney, and Pentecost was synonymous with Joshua, who died at the age of 110. It is 110 days to the collapse of the chimney and the Columbia gas explosions with the 16-year-old that died, which hinted at 4 times 4, and 44 days after that was Game 4 and player number 44 and the 4-0 blown lead, which hints at 400 years and the spiritual founding of America in Massachusetts at Plymouth Rock, hence the connection to the Chimney Rock State Park sign. On Pentecost, make sure you watch the 23 church signs video on this channel. And from then, it is exactly 54 months, which hints at the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, which hints at the Civil War and this theme of slavery and freedom, to the rainbow over the rainbow gas tank, which is 7 days to the predicted explosion in New York City, a Boston to New York connection, just like the planes from Boston to New York on 9/11, and the collapse of America's walls of security, the symbolic beginning of it, which will lead to the Antichrist on this date 5/4, which also hints at 54 in the 54th Massachusetts Regiment. And this date 5/4 hints at 9. 54 is a multiple of 9, and 5 plus 4 equals 9. And it is in 2023, which gives us a pairing of 9 and 23, which reveals the identity of the Antichrist, the basketball president that wore jersey number 23 and became president in 2009. Who will become president again in 2023. The Antichrist after 400 years. The FRAUD in the 2020 ELECTION was exactly 400 years after the Pilgrims landed off the coast of Cape Cod in November of 1620. The reason for going into this trail that I just explained from Pentecost to this predicted dirty bomb in Manhattan on the date 5/4/2023, which hints at 923, is to demonstrate that this is and ultimately, primarily, a judgment warning for the American church. And this 923 that is hinted at, this pairing of 9 and 23, which is in the date, is also identifying the mark of the Antichrist, which is and the reason why 9 and 23 reveals the identity of the Antichrist is that the inverse of the mark of the Antichrist is described in Ezekiel chapter 9, and it affects one's 23 chromosomes. So that's another reason for 9 and 23. Now, the reason for the mark of the Antichrist and the Antichrist is it is a test of faith for the church. The primary, the reason for the reason for God's creation, the reason for the universe is the church. This is God's focus. This is the purpose of things. And therefore, it is also the purpose of the end times period. It is primarily a test of faith for Christians, and it will serve to bring people to the faith, masses of people to the faith during the end times. But this is the purpose of the Antichrist and the mark of the Antichrist. It is to cleanse his church. And so that is the purpose for the mark of the Antichrist. And why many, many Christians have already taken the mark of the Antichrist. In general, they weren't crying out for justice and righteousness as it is described in Ezekiel chapter 9, which is about the mark of the Antichrist. Those that didn't receive the mark were those that weren't crying out for justice and righteousness and didn't recognize how dark the times are. That's why they were oblivious to what was going on. They weren't really paying attention, but they had a lack of knowledge. And as the prophet Hosea said, God said through Hosea, my people reject knowledge. My people reject knowledge. This applies to many, many Christians today. My people have rejected knowledge. Therefore, I reject them from being my priests. And this rejection of knowledge is also rooted in worldliness. I'm getting a little bit too philosophical, too deep here, but why not? This is the point of it all. And the reason for people not crying out, not recognizing how dark the times are, having a lack of knowledge, is they were living worldly lives, barely indistinguishable from other non-believers. And it's the result of bad doctrine, ultimately. The biggest root of all of this is the root of the bad tree is bad doctrine. And God has also identified what that doctrine is. But it is the doctrine that produces this complacency and this lack of desire for righteousness and truth, and just essentially living a good life, pursuing vacations, retirement, careers, success, family, everything that the world pursues. You can see that, and furthermore, within churches, you can see it with what's being taught. It's essentially what the Bible can do for you instead of understanding the gospel of salvation for humanity type of perspective. The messages even, for example, from pastors, quote unquote pastors, because that's another subject. One of the biggest problems is pastors. Pastors, the institution of pastors, which was inherited from the Catholic Church, sitting in rows of seats and listening to one man talk for an hour and not being allowed to say anything. And if you do say anything to the group during that time, you will be escorted immediately out of the church. It's a dictatorship, just like Catholicism. But because of that, it's it's an institution that relies on people attending it and supporting it with their money, and that's what corrupts it. It's not the way God designed the church to be. This whole institution, whether it be Catholicism and priests, but also pastors and their message. But what I'm saying is that the message ultimately gets watered down, and the people think that they're Christian and they get spoon-fed this watered down message. And anyway, so the point is that and they also preach the heretical doctrine of sovereign grace and free grace, which leads to once saved, always saved, and the myth of imputed righteousness as evangelicals understand it, and our righteousness as filthy rags, one verse that Luther took out of context to develop his entire heretical doctrine, Gnostic doctrine, and the predestination of the saints, etc. So anyway, make sure you watch the 23 church signs video, which will talk about, for among other things, the many, many church judgment signs, including this main one that I haven't mentioned yet. That's the big thing about this trail of signs that I just described. Because on game one of the World Series, at the time, or just after, the rainbow over Fenway Park, that was at the time that the plane crashed in Los Angeles. And again, the World Series was between Boston and Los Angeles, because the two planes that struck the two towers on 9/11 were flights from Boston to Los Angeles. But in the early evening at 7 p.m., a 7-alarm fire went off when lightning struck the steeple of a historic church in Boston, in Wakefield, the area of Boston, at a historic downtown 150-year-old church was struck by lightning. 7-alarm fire. I forget how many firemen it took to put the fire out, but it completely decimated this church in a horrific burn. And the only thing that survived, and this was national news, it's what made it a national news story, besides it being a historic church, is that there was one painting that survived, a painting of Jesus, and it survived without a scratch. The firemen carried this painting of Jesus out of the ruins, the debris of the burnt church, and somehow, miraculously, it survived without a scratch. And the reason is God was pointing to Jesus and demonstrating to the church. And it was a First Baptist church, by the way. It was an evangelical church. God was demonstrating to the American church that it has fallen out of grace with God. It has lost its focus, which is Jesus. It was a 150-year-old church. That was in the headlines. It was literally, as the headlines said, almost 150 years. I forget. Maybe it was, I don't know, a year or two shy of 150 years. But the headlines read 150-year-old church. And the reason why that is because that date, which was October 23rd, 2018, was exactly 150 days after the Pentecost that I just mentioned, with the many signs on that Pentecost that were judgment warning signs for the church because it's Pentecost, including the collapse of the retaining wall at Chimney Rock State Park. Rock symbolizes Jesus. And also in the account of Noah's flood, the flood lasted for 150 days. And so from this Pentecost, which symbolizes the church, it is 150 days to this game one with this rainbow, and Typhoon Yutu, which is Noah's flood symbolism. And so from these prophetic signs on Pentecost, which is symbolism for the church, it is 150 days, which is Noah's flood symbolism, to these prophetic signs on October 23rd, 2018, and the burning of the church on the day of the prophetic rainbow, which is Noah's flood symbolism, over Fenway Park, on the same day as the Typhoon U2, that was the strongest ever. God uses records in his signs to confirm his signs, the strongest ever storm to touch U.S. soil. And Typhoon U2 is Noah's flood symbolism. And the Pacific Islands that it pummeled were one using the World War II planes, and at that time also was the historic plane that crashed on the Highway 1 in Los Angeles. And it was a fiery crash. The plane crash was a fiery crash, and it was at the time of the fire, the historic church fire. And Peter said that judgment begins with the church, and that this coming judgment would be symbolized by fire instead of water. And that 150 days is again broken into 110 days and 40 days, because as I explained, 110 days, which hints at Joshua and the walls of security that collapsed on Jericho. 110 days after that was the collapse of the chimney onto the 16-year-old. And from that date is 40 days, which is the number of days of the increased floodwaters in the account of Noah's flood, to game 1, which was marked by the rainbow, which is Noah's flood symbolism, right before game 1 of the World Series. And then as the World Series was beginning at 7 p.m., this church was struck by lightning, the steeple. And by the way, the steeple, it was a roof fire. It was one of these church roof fires signs, because on Pentecost, the disciples were waiting in the upper room. That's hence the reason for the church roof fires, including, for example, that the one that everyone knows about, the 9-hour Notre Dame Cathedral roof fire in Paris. But this like, this sign that I'm talking about is like the sign, if you will, this, because of the extreme importance of this 2018 World Series, but this is the main sign. Also, in New England at the same time, in this same storm, there was a tornado, which is very rare for New England. This tornado struck or touched down in Lincoln, Rhode Island, a town named Lincoln. And, well, there's significance to that, but it points to the Great American Eclipse, which peaked over the land of Lincoln and entered the U.S. on the coast of Oregon, over cities or towns on the coast, Lincoln City and Lincoln Beach in Lincoln County. And it is all Civil War symbolism, just as the 54th Massachusetts Regiment is Civil War symbolism, which is symbolism for slavery and freedom, which is the overarching theme of the Bible and of life, and what this current Civil War is all about. It is a battle for freedom versus slavery. And whether people involved in the war know it or not, including those that are on the side of slavery. So, but that's the point of this church fire. It was in God's signature number that indicates his divine touch upon something is the number 7. It was a 7-alarm fire, massive burn, and it was at 7 p.m. at the time of the beginning of the World Series. And by the way, at that beginning, another sign, the national anthem was sung by James Taylor, and that was because right before the 1989 World Series earthquake, 29 years earlier, as I explained, was the broadcast, opening of the broadcast, and then the earthquake that knocked the power out in the broadcast booth. But that broadcast began with the song by James Taylor, this extremely prophetic opening of the broadcast. And the reason why, too, many reasons, of course, but the world was watching. The world watched this earthquake live because of this game in the Bay Area, coincidentally, by God, between the two teams from the San Francisco Bay Area. And by the way, when I was a kid, and I didn't grow up in a Christian family, I had zero Christian teaching in my home. But even as a kid, I knew that couldn't be a coincidence. I just knew intuitively that I didn't believe me, I didn't become a Christian because of this at the time. I was a kid. I didn't know what to think, right? But I knew that something was not, there was more to this, in other words, is what I knew. Because how could it be that the earthquake occurs right during the game and the two teams are playing are the teams from San Francisco? I mean, how can any materialist, secular, non-believer not put two and two together? I don't understand that. But anyway, that was designed by God, that earthquake, and that is all about the opening of the broadcast, which began with the song sung by James Taylor, and that's why the opening of the 2018 World Series was, and I explained the prophetic connection between the two World Series, that's why that national anthem, the national anthem, was sung at Fenway Park by James Taylor shortly after the rainbow over Fenway Park. But the point here is that this is all judgment for the church. This is all judgment for the church. That's why the church fire and the painting that survived of Jesus. The focus is not Jesus. It's not truth and righteousness and justice. And so again, from the day of this Lincoln tornado and church fire, it is 150-year-old historic church. It is 150 days from the Pentecost, but then 40 days to, and then from the church fire and the tornado in Lincoln and the rainbow over Fenway Park and the plane, the World War II plane that crashed on Highway 101 in Los Angeles and Typhoon U2, all of that on October 23rd, 2018 is 4 days to player number 44 and the 4-0 blown lead in Game 4. And then that day is exactly 54 months, which is also Civil War symbolism because it hints at the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, to the rainbow over the rainbow gas tank, which is 7 days to the date 5-4, which also hints at 54 and the 54th Massachusetts Regiment. And it is also, as I'm saying now, connected to the church that burned in Massachusetts. And since we have now, in this video, gone through the prophetic signs in Game 1, Game 2, and Game 4 of this prophetic World Series, this 2018 World Series, we might as well go into briefly the prophetic sign in Game 3, because the first 4 games of this World Series were prophetic. As far as I'm aware, there were not any prophetic signs in Game 5. And there's a reason, because God was pointing to the number 4, as has been explained. Furthermore, it was their fourth, the Boston Red Sox, it was their 4th World Series win since they broke the curse of the Bambino in 2004. And anyway, this Game 3 was the longest ever World Series game in history. It went 18 innings. It was tied 2-2 and went into extra innings. And the game was finally won in the 18th inning with a home run, a solo home run, by Los Angeles Dodgers player I forget his name, but I don't think it had any prophetic significance. Otherwise, I probably would remember his name. I could be wrong, though. But his story was a Cinderella story. The news the next day or following that game was talking about how this was a rags to riches story, how he had, I think, at one time almost quit baseball or something. I forget all the details. It's been 5 years now. But he was almost out of baseball. There might have been some issue, I forget, personal life issue. But anyway, it was a rags to riches story because he came back and then he became the hero of this Game 3 World Series game, and the only game that the Los Angeles Dodgers won in that World Series. So his home run was hit after midnight. The World Series is known for having gone past midnight, this longest World Series game ever. And this was all to point to Jesus' parable about the rapture at the midnight cry. Those Christians, because the parable is about Christians, and there were 10 bridesmaids, 5 of them made it into the wedding banquet, while the other 5 didn't. But all 10 were sleeping. Only the bride is watching for the Lord's return. In other words, the vast majority of Christians, quote unquote, aren't doing what Jesus commanded, which is to doing what this video is describing, watching for the signs of the Lord's return, and therefore are sleeping. But the 5 that had the oil, which is symbolic of the Holy Spirit, were allowed to enter the wedding banquet, whereas the other 5 were not. And then Jesus warned, therefore watch, which is one of the commands for watching for the Lord's return, the timing of the Lord's return. And so anyway, the point is that many Christians will be left behind in the rapture, first of all. That's the only way to read that text, because they're all Christians, and half of them get left behind. Who knows if that's literal, if it will be half that will be left behind. Regardless, the case is many Christians will be left behind after the rapture. And if you're not familiar with what the rapture is, that's when God's faithful will disappear and not have to go through the tribulation period of the Antichrist, the final 5 months. The rapture will be next Pentecost on May 26th, 2024. And anyway, so that was the point of this sign. The score was tied at 2-2, and the player's number was 13. And from the Bible, the number 13 symbolizes the Antichrist. As Nimrod, a type for the Antichrist, was the 13th generation from Ham, Haman, another type for the Antichrist, persecuted the Jews on the 2 13th days of the month, and the 2 Antichrists are described in the book of Revelation in chapter 13. And this was 18 innings, which is 6 + 6 + 6, which also hints at the number of the Antichrist, which is mentioned in Revelation chapter 13. And the tie score of 2-2 hinted at 22, the number that God uses in his big picture of signs as symbolism for the mark of the Antichrist. Because the inverse of the mark of the Antichrist, described in Ezekiel chapter 9, would have been the Tav mark. And the Tav is the 22nd last letter and 22nd letter in the Hebrew alphabet. And the mark of the Antichrist is described in the last book of the Bible, the 22nd book out of 22 books that have a total of 22 chapters, the book of Revelation. And so that's why the score was 2-2. And then the tie was broken, making it 2-3, which hinted at 23. And one of the main reasons why the number 23 is the number of the Antichrist, or identifies Barack Obama, who wore jersey number 23, is that in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus said that the rooster would not crow twice before Peter would deny him 3 times. It was a 2 and a 3. So the hint at 23 hints at the 2 and the 3. And so the score 2-3 is actually more accurate than even the number 23, if you will. So it's very relevant. The number 2-3, score 2-3, the final score. And what will the Christians that are raptured be escaping? They will be escaping the mark of the Antichrist, which again is symbolized by 23 because it affects 23 chromosomes. And so that's why the score was tied to 2-2 into the 18th inning, and then became a final score of 2-3, and why the final home run was hit by player number 13. It was hit by the Los Angeles Dodgers because in the name Dodgers hints at dodging the Antichrist and the mark of the Antichrist. But also, the team in 1888 was named the Bridegrooms. That was the year that it was named the Bridegrooms. It wasn't named that in 1887. It was named that in 1888, the Brooklyn Bridegrooms, before it became the Dodgers. And by the way, the Dodgers is the reason for the name Dodgers is because of the allusion to dodging the trolley cars, which was a new technology back then and was seemingly dangerous. But anyway, so the bridegrooms, that's because of Jesus, and he is the bridegroom in the parable of the midnight cry in Matthew 25. It's the bridegroom. The bridesmaids are waiting for the bridegroom. And 1888, because 888 symbolizes Jesus, because the Greek numeric value of the word Jesus in Greek, because Greek letters are also numbers just like Roman letters, is 888. That's why the bridegroom's in 1888. It's also the year that President Benjamin Harrison was elected, and that was the 23rd presidency. Grover Cleveland skipped the 23rd presidency, the only president to serve non-consecutive terms, just like Barack Obama will serve non-consecutive terms, and that's why. That's why he wore jersey 23s, because it hints at serving non-consecutive terms. And the only grandfather-grandson presidents were William and Benjamin Harrison, and William Harrison was the 9th president. That's another pairing of 9 and 23, which confirms all of the relevance of Barack Obama, who was president in 2009 and will be again in 2023 and wore jersey 23. That's also why he wore jersey 23, because he'll become the Antichrist in 2023. So that's why it was hit by the Los Angeles Dodgers. But also Los Angeles is Spanish for the angels, and Revelation chapter 12, which is about the rapture, the dragon and his angels are thrown down from heaven to earth. That's what also that is symbolic for. And Kamala Harris, and that's why Benjamin Harrison is because Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash on her way to Los Angeles, which will symbolize angels thrown down from heaven. And she will die in her plane crash on her way to Los Angeles. Her plane will crash in St. Louis. And that's why Benjamin Harrison. And so anyway, also 13, because of what I explained earlier. The huge significance of this 2018 World Series is that it is 29 years after the 1989 World Series, because Jesus began his ministry in 29 AD, and 1989 is 13 times 153, as I explained. His ministry was begun with him, Jesus, and his 12 disciples, 13 men. 153 is symbolic of the end of the age of fishing for men, as I explained. So 13 times 153 is 1989. 29 AD plus 1989 years is 2018. And that's why this player's number, also a reason, is number 13, who symbolized the bridegrooms at the end of the age of fishing for men. And so that was the prophetic sign in Game 3 for you. And oh yeah, if it wasn't clear, the reason why this player had a Cinderella story, and that was literally what it was called in the mainstream media, the reason why he had a Cinderella story is because the game went past midnight, and in the story of Cinderella, it's all about how Cinderella turned back to her carriage, turned back into a pumpkin, and she turned back into her dress of rags after midnight. So it's the midnight cry, a more of an allusion and confirmation of the prophetic significance of this midnight cry, prophetic sign, which points to the midnight cry in Matthew 25, the parable of the 10 bridesmaids. Also, I'll just give you another trail of signs here, because if you caught it, this trail actually begins with the burning of the White House and the Capitol building in 1813, when the British landed on Washington's Mount Vernon estate. Because again, it was exactly 1,260 months to the prophetic Boston Red Sox Chicago Cubs World Series, which was, as explained, exactly a prophetic 86 years, which hints at 8 times 6 equals 48, and the 48th president, to the Boston Red Sox breaking the curse of the Bambino with the blood moon over the Gateway Arch, which symbolized the beginning of judgment on the nation, because judgment symbolically begins at the gates. And that game 4, when they beat the Cardinals 4-0, was exactly 14 years before the Boston Red Sox Game 4, which they won after the player number 44 was pulled too early and blew the 4-0 lead. And that again is exactly 54 months to the rainbow over the rainbow gas tank, and is 7 days before May 4th, the predicted date of the dirty bomb explosion. And so we have the burning of the White House and the Capitol building connect with this predicted dirty bomb explosion in Manhattan on May 4th, which will lead to the rise of the Antichrist. Also, the Antichrist is the 44th president, and the Antichrist will be defeated at the return of Lord Jesus Christ in 2024 on October 12th. And that will be 404 years after the Pilgrims landed in November of 1620. And 404 years hints at 44, the 44th president, Antichrist. The rainbow over the rainbow gas tank is 7 days before the predicted explosion in New York City. The rainbow gas tank is a major landmark in Boston and is located off Interstate Highway 93. The sun is 93 million miles away from Earth. The end times passage, or rather the end times passage in Bible prophecy, is Daniel 9:27. The rainbow over the rainbow gas tank in Boston is exactly 9 months and 27 days before the predicted explosion on the surface of the sun. A catastrophic solar flare that will cause massive power outages on Earth and in America, which is what the ban on gas energy in New York State hints at. The name of the company on the side of the gas tank on the I-93 highway is National Grid, and this hints at the nation's power grid going down after the explosion on the surface of the sun, 93 million miles away. And so there you have it, this judgment for the Antichrist religion, which is climate hysteria, so-called climate change. It's pure lie, unadulterated lie. It's a capture of the it's an example of the capture of the institutions and manipulated science that contradicts the real science that you never hear about because of censorship, because of the religion, because it's like the Catholic religion. You're not allowed to have another opinion. It's dictatorship, just like Catholicism with the Pope at the top and the hierarchy of men that dictate the correct interpretation, which is always heresy of the Bible. So likewise, the false religion of the Antichrist is what is behind the motivation for New York State to ban gas in buildings under 7 stories. And God is judging that. And he's used that energy symbolism to point to the coming energy crisis. He's saying, look, you want to make it all part of the electrical grid and not take this gas that I gave you, which benefits plants, not harms them. It benefits the world's climate and isn't heating up the climate, by the way, but as if that would be a bad thing anyway. But if you don't want to take this gas that God speaking, that I put in the ground for you so that you could develop your economies and have cheap gas and cheap energy, if you want to make it all, the electrical grid, then here you go. Here comes the judgment, right? There's more reason, of course, for the upcoming catastrophic solar flare on the sun. Don't get me wrong. But that's one reason. Another aspect, too, is the reason why the left, the collectivists, the socialists, the anti-democracy blue team, the anti-human religion seeks to take gas away, natural gas for energy, is because someone can be independent with natural gas. They can just go get natural gas and fill up a tank and live off their tank. But if you are part of the grid, you are subject to the state. and you are at the whim of the state's control. And that's the other big reason for the push to eliminate gas stoves and natural gas. It's to make people dependent on the state and make them slaves, which is the drive of Satan. Because the big theme of the Bible, the overarching theme of the Bible, is this theme of slavery and freedom, as is life. And Satan hates the fact that we are made in God's image and have free will. And his goal is to take away our free will and make us slaves, which is what is behind the politics of the blue team. Whether they realize it consciously or not, they are working for Satan. And that's why they are currently waging war on democracy and freedom in the name of their so-called moral crusades, which are based on lies from Satan. That's the truth. And the purpose of this prediction is to prove this. That is the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction. And one last thing, this is the reason for the symbolism in the 54th Massachusetts Regiment and this 54 months connection, which is essentially what this video is all about, this 54 months connection and the dirty bomb that is predicted to explode on the date 5/4, which hints at 54, and these Massachusetts signs. It's because this is symbolism for the Civil War, which is a spiritual war, the current Civil War, between slavery and freedom. The predicted dirty bomb, explosion, and mass evacuation from Manhattan Island on May 4th, 2023 is exactly 93 months after August 4th, 2015, the 54th birthday of the 44th president, when he was in Chicago. And again, the date 5/4 hints at 54. And on this birthday, the 44th president was in Chicago, and while he was in Chicago, 4 sisters in Chicago had 4 babies over 4 days. 44 people died on Flight 93 on 9/11. Exactly 42 weeks, which hints at 42 months, which is mentioned 7 times in Bible prophecy as being the symbolic period of the Antichrist's rule. Exactly 42 weeks after May 4th, 2023, and the predicted explosion in Manhattan will be the predicted explosion on the surface of the sun that is 93 million miles away. As I wrote in my email, 93 million exclamation marks. Because the sun is 93 million miles away, and exactly 42 weeks prior to the predicted explosion on the surface of the sun is the predicted explosion in Manhattan on the date 5/4, which hints at 54, and the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, and the theme of slavery and freedom. And 5/4 is exactly 93 months after the 54th birthday of the Antichrist, the 44th president, when 4 sisters over 4 days had 4 babies in Chicago, and he was in Chicago. And on Flight 93 on 9/11, the big judgment warning, 44 people died. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. God became a man and died a horrible death at the hand of the ruler of this world, Satan, and then defeated death for you, so that you too can overcome death, which is the price that must be paid for sin. It is time to repent, which means to change one's ways and turn to God and become a disciple of Jesus. Please leave a like and upvote the video. And once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more. Don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, TrumpPrediction.com. If you are watching this on the YouTube platform, please note that not all of the videos are on YouTube. you need to switch to the BitChute.com or the Odyssey.com channel. And do it now in case you aren't able to later.